Hi, this is Stefan Bühner dialing in now from Kontakt.io. Apologies for the short delay. Happy to have all of you here. I believe you can see my screen. If not, if there are any issues, please let us know in the chat. My technical colleagues will take care of that. Also, for today, we have a bit of a different approach. I'm not only myself sitting in Berlin from the product team, but I also have a colleague joining myself from Krakow. That would be Orkun.
Hi, everyone.
Perfect. So that works as well. Just to point out, that is a bit of an experiment. We're doing this to make sure that the conversation is a bit more lively and more interesting for you. We've done that last time. We did a webinar with Bluetooth SIG, and I think that will be beneficial for you as well. We have quite a program to get through, so let's get started. One of the first things I'm not going to do is actually go through that agenda in detail. I think that's one of the most boring things that typically happens in webinars. Let me just point out that I won't be going into depth on Bluetooth 5 at this time. We'll be focusing on Bluetooth Mesh, simply because we've seen the biggest interest around that topic. In a future webinar, we'll go deeper into what we believe Bluetooth Mesh will mean for us here at Kontakt.io, but also for the Bluetooth and beacon ecosystem in a wider context. Orkun, this agenda so far, does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Let's move on.
Perfect. Okay. Good. As I said, we have Orkun and Krakow and myself in Berlin, so we're testing our banter here. Good. Starting with Bluetooth Mesh then. Bluetooth Mesh, of course, is one of those issues that has been, I think, since the beginning of Bluetooth, always an interesting topic. Obviously, it's technically very appealing, and for all of us on the technical side, constantly thinking about that and how that could drive value. From my perspective, though, as a product person, I'd like to, before going into depth of how we see Mesh being utilized, briefly into how we look at new technologies at Kontakt.io in general. That is, to me, quite important, especially since we see all elements of the stack in IoT move so fast with new technologies popping up and new use cases. So at Kontakt.io, when we consider a new technology, what we always do is first look at the application. And that if you see the slides, which I hope you do, and I assume since I haven't heard any angry feedback from my technical team, then you'll see the application layer on the far right, right? And what the application does is critically it provides the business value. And to provide that business value, it uses the data generated earlier in the entire stack. And you can, of course, differentiate here further, but one of the key elements is that one of those applications can be locally hosted or hosted on the web. If you go to the left on the slide, deeper into the stack, so to speak, there's two more elements, right? The central element is communication. And what communication does, it gets the data from what has been sensed on the far left side to wherever the application runs. So be that the cloud or be that a locally hosted application, right? In the context of Bluetooth sensing, and for the technical, I'm aware that this should probably be called sensing and actuation, but just to simplify here, sensing typically involves location, but we're now, with the maturing of the ecosystem, reach a stage where sensing also includes elements like acceleration, temperature, or also two-way communications like a button press or any other state that might be of relevance for the business application. So if we look into this in general, we have three steps. We have on the left sensing, then we have the communication layer to get whatever has been sensed to the application layer, which then is responsible to generate the business value. Now the question is, where does Mesh, regardless of how exciting it might be, technically fit in? And it's quite straightforward. In fact, Mesh is just a different type of network topology, so it's a communication layer. So before we get all excited and start building something with Mesh on our teams, we're looking into how does that serve the application and what criteria do we have to look at to consider how Mesh could help the application layer. And for those technical-minded, this is quite familiar. For any sort of communication layer, the 5 core elements would be power consumption, of course, especially relevant since we run our sensors on battery, the range, a familiar concern for those working with Bluetooth, latency, so the speed from the sensing to the application, and throughput, which is how much data can be transmitted, which matters because if your application layer is reliant on data every 100 millisecond, data of a large volume of many tags of complex state data of the underlying asset, the throughput will be key. So before going now deeper, important to frame mesh correctly. Mesh is a communication technology that helps as long as it helps the application layer that generates the business value to get data from the underlying sensors effectively. Orkun, what am I missing here? Am I going down a rabbit hole? What makes sense? Do you have any questions?
It all makes sense. I mean, I just have a question, but I think I will save it until the end of your mesh presentation. So all is good so far. Okay, please proceed.
Thank you. Do write that down. I think the questions that you are having, most people will be having.
Yeah, I'm taking notes.
Okay, wonderful, perfect. Let's continue. So this will be a 15-second slide, just briefly recapping where we are with Bluetooth mesh within the entire environment of Bluetooth Low Energy. There's 3 topologies, as it were. There would be the Bluetooth Low Energy one-on-one communication. So that's used typically in applications where you're transferring data from a Fitbit or from any other device. We need a constant stream of data to the application layer and the receiver. That's number 1. Number 2 is the broadcasting mode, which is what we are using. A device not establishing a fixed connection with the receiver, but generally broadcast in the open. And of course, the classic use case, probably familiar to most people in this webinar, would be iBeacons or Eddystone beacons used by mobile phone for say indoor navigation. And now Bluetooth mesh fits into that class of topologies, of course, with its unique capabilities. So far now, just for recapping, we'll now move into the more technical domain, looking at Bluetooth mesh within the context of Bluetooth mesh as a communication technology. And I've just seen that we have a couple of people joining late, so we'll confuse everybody else and jump back for 1 second to outline where we are when we look at this in technical detail. We've established earlier that Bluetooth mesh is an element of communication. The criteria we apply are power consumption, range, latency, and throughput. And the purpose of that is to feed the application layer with information that ultimately generate value for the business. So with that in mind, we'll be looking at the technical details of Bluetooth mesh. And just to be precise here, there's a variety of mesh systems around, proprietary ones, other mesh systems using the same antennas but a different part of the stack. What we're considering here is the sort of official Bluetooth mesh. All information is taken from the specifications launched in July, I believe it was, revision 1.0. The first element, as the product team we consider, is the power consumption. Our devices are powered by batteries, and that makes them independent, so that's a key constraint. Here it is important to consider how Bluetooth mesh solves that power consumption problem. If you look at that wonderful graph below the slides, you'll see 3 main type of nodes, and a node is just an element in a network. We have the red nodes, those are called relay nodes, and those are what we typically perceive as a node in a mesh network, so heavily both receiving and broadcasting at the same time. And we have in blue the sort of regular nodes that do handle quite a lot of traffic, but are less active in relaying than the red relay nodes. And we have low power nodes in yellow that essentially broadcast at a lower frequency. If you want to go into much greater depth, of course, do go into the specifications. What matters here for this level is that the power consumption of the relay nodes, so those big red ones, let me start that sentence again. So the power consumption of the relay nodes is so high that they are most likely not to be powered by batteries or capacitors, right? And that's the quote in the table in the first line that's taken directly from the specifications. The relay nodes, so typical nodes in a mesh network, are not designed to function with a battery, right? That answers the important element of power consumption for our technology here. Second, for the sake of completeness, looking at range, it's nothing new. We're looking at a range similar to the well-established Bluetooth boundaries. There's nothing new here. What doesn't matter a lot for our use case now, and what I've highlighted earlier in the discussion of the IoT stack in general, is the throughput and the latency. I'm ignoring latency here. That's within the line of what's known with Bluetooth and with Bluetooth beacons in particular. What is a key consideration is the amount of data passed through this mesh network. So a single message can contain up to 11 bytes. If you sort of chunk those messages together and reassemble them on the location of the receiver, you're looking up to 384 bytes. So quite something more, but still not drastic. And of course, if you're looking at this larger data volume, there's significant increase of latency. So now we'll zoom out again and get back to us as Kontakt.io, our plans, and the application of Bluetooth mesh that we see as realistic within the next sort of quarters. If we look at use case number one that one would have thought plausible for mesh, and that would be a mesh configuration of tags, changing transmission powers, changing other settings inherent to Bluetooth tags, or updating the firmware. That is in fact not possible, or not conveniently or reliably possible with Bluetooth mesh. And that's because what we've seen earlier, the data volume or the throughput is quite low. So that first use case is not a focus. The second element would be the streaming telemetry data. There are scenarios where 8 bytes might be sufficient to stream telemetry data, but because of the power consumption of that relay node that we've touched upon on the first slide, streaming telemetry data will most likely also not be a use case, simply given the underlying technology constraints. Now we look at the last use case. So here we're looking at telemetry events and two-way communication. And what telemetry events mean as opposed to a stream of telemetry data is that there's no constant stream of data, but only at defined, under defined conditions will data be forwarded. So say you have a temperature sensor attached to an engine or any other asset you might be interested in. Mesh could be useful, and we are considering that to relay the fact that temperature has exceeded a predefined threshold, right? That's much less often of a load that could be handled through mesh. Similarly for two-way communication. So if you think about the press of a button, that on a data level has a size that we believe and we are considering and we are planning to use mesh to relay that information. So far for my, I believe, very fast summary. So Orkun, I'll be very thankful for your questions that highlight where I've gone too fast or what I've missed.
Okay, so just to clarify here, at present, a Bluetooth beacon is a one-way transmitter, right? It sends a data package to receivers. This can be either a consumer device, mobile phone, or tablet, or a gateway. Does this mean that with a Bluetooth mesh, a Bluetooth beacon will turn into a transceiver? Does this what you refer to with two-way communication?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So what you're pointing out is the question, will a beacon itself become both a receiver and a transmitter to other beacons, right? That's what you mean?
That's right, yes.
Right. So here, if you look at this slide again, and in particular these red dots here that you see in the middle, right? Those red dots, those are the devices that both receive and broadcast data. And those within the specifications of Bluetooth are called relay nodes because they're constantly relaying data. Most likely, a beacon itself will never become a relaying node. And that's because of the power consumption that this relaying needs. So we don't expect our beacons to both receive and broadcast constantly. Most likely, that functionality will shift into, say, lightning systems or Wi-Fi access points. Does that make sense?
Yes, that perfectly makes sense. Thank you, Stefan. And I don't see any question from our participants, so I will go for my second question, which is, in your opinion, what use cases will benefit from a Bluetooth mesh network the most?
Yeah, that's a very good question, of course. At this point, I believe applications that require relatively low levels of data. So that could be buttons that, think of emergency buttons in hospitals. In that case, you really have only the press of a button you have to rely. Say you have an emergency button on the carried by a nurse or on a bed. That press of that button is only one piece of information. It's basically button pressed equals yes. And that, I believe, is data volume-wise a use case that is very likely to be realized, and probably with lightning systems or access points acting as relaying nodes.
Perfect. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. We'll be moving on. We have quite something to cover. Next up is our view on the market. I think this is what we partly announced in the advertisement to this webinar. And here I have to give a caveat. We're shipping more than 600,000 devices a year. So our customer base is quite broad. So everything I'm mentioning here is a distillation of the truth that we see in everyday life. And to begin with, I'll make one point clear again that I believe is often missed, and that's the distinction of the use cases of Bluetooth devices. Beacons, which we are also, as a company, I think, famous for, you started out as stationary devices, right? What that means is there's a beacon fixed somewhere, one knows where that beacon is, and therefore if a mobile phone comes close to that beacon, it can be determined where that mobile phone is. Ideally, if the phone comes close to 3 beacons, then you can determine even more accurately where that phone is. But the methodology is the same. The beacon is fixed, the phone moves, the phone understands where it is by knowing where the fixed beacon is. So that's one application of Bluetooth Low Energy, and particularly beacons. Indoor navigation, marketing, those are the very familiar use cases. However, the second use case that has become much more prevalent and is growing at a very high rate is a scenario in which the beacon or the Bluetooth tag itself is moving around and the receiver is fixed. And that allows the receiver to understand where whatever the thing is to which the beacon is attached is. So for example, you have a beacon attached to a bed. When that bed with that beacon enters a certain room, a receiver picks up that beacon. You, by inference, also know where the bed is. So these are two different use cases. It's very important to keep them distinct, and that will reduce a lot of confusion that typically happens in the discussion of Bluetooth tags and beacons. Now, if we look closer at the trends that we see, there's really 3 main trends. That's especially relating to Q2 and Q3 of 2017. Number one is there's still no sort of dramatic explosion of the use of traditional beacons. That's not surprising. I think one always expects that. But instead of an explosion with everybody adopting beacons like Pokemon Go, we see a consistent growth. The important element, of course, is that we see a consistent growth for those traditional use cases. Essentially, they're consolidating, the value provided becomes much clearer, the growth is consistent but not spectacular. The second more interesting element relates back to my previous slide, is that we see more and more classic RFID use cases shifting to Bluetooth Low Energy. So that means in more and more cases, we see the Bluetooth tag being attached to assets, those tags then being picked up by a receiver to inform of the position of the underlying asset. That is really a big shift that we see from RFIDs specifically towards BLE. And number three, that's the last point, very exciting for me, I think, especially picking up in Q2, is that with the ecosystem maturing, we see non-traditional solution providers entering the Bluetooth market, and those would be lightning providers that, of course, have access to electricity in any building, and also Wi-Fi access point providers. So these players are entering the market, which opens up a variety of use cases, and allows for very exciting potential in that field. Before I talk more on this very abstract level, maybe Orkun, you can comment what you see in your daily work.
I agree with all of your points here, all the 3 points. I can say that traditional beacon use cases such as location-based content marketing and indoor navigation, so location-based services, so to say, are picking up, and we see increase in number of projects, also in size of deployments, right? Right. So the number of beacons deployed per project is growing. Another interesting thing, as you said, that the RFID users are shifting through BLE, and then we see an interest in asset and people tracking solutions based on BLE tags. Right. As well, like I think for me, I'm the person probably most engaged with lighting solution providers. So I can see that with lighting solution providers coming into play, I believe that Bluetooth will be the mainstream technology that will be used across all the industries.
Right, and that's of course powered by the fact that lighting systems already have electricity, or what do you think drives that adoption by the lighting solution providers?
I think, for sure, either a tag or a receiver embedded into lighting products, let's say, enables this, but as well in an office space, in hospital, in manufacturing, logistics, warehousing. A lighting system is present in every industry, in every facility, in every building. And that's why embedded Bluetooth products into the lighting products will enable this growth, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a very good point. We have the presence of lighting system in basically all environments where humans are present. So that's a very good starting point, and I'm quite excited to see what that will unleash in terms of both solutions as well as verticals. Switching now to the exciting parts. What are we doing on the hardware side? What are we doing on the software side? I call this following part also job to be done, and that is again to highlight that we at Kontakt.io try to think about the problem we are solving, not so much about the hardware, but addressing a particular need that we sort of observe in the industry. And what's most exciting here for us within the next 2 months at maximum is that we're looking heavily at asset tracking. And I think it's crucial to say that asset tracking, while it's a cool and trendy word, is also not a value in and of itself. Asset tracking only provides value insofar as it helps to, eliminate process bottlenecks by, for example, understanding the flow of asset or staff through certain process steps, be that in a hospital, be that in manufacturing, by making employees more productive, reducing equipment search time is a typical application, or, and this is quite exciting, by being able to communicate the state of an asset and that location. So what that means, for example, is if you have a if you have a wheelchair broken in a certain part of a hospital, there's two pieces of information you want to rely. Number one, that wheelchair is broken, and number two, where is that broken wheelchair, right? And that will eliminate needs for staff, for example, to either transfer that broken wheelchair to the repair facility or another loop of communication. The same thing that we see more and more coming up, and that we believe we're here to support, is the fact that knowing the state of an asset at the location of the asset is also a job to be done. And that could be something like knowing whether a bed or a wheelchair or a piece of equipment or a working station is free. And that information is sometimes not actually locally available, but it is available in the back end of the process as it relies on other process steps that may or may not occur before. So I've talked a lot about that. What is it that we're actually launching? What we're launching is a beacon that we call the tag beacon. We remain not very creative in the naming, but that beacon is designed to address those jobs that we observe quite frequently. It comes with three main assets. Number one is a button that's configurable. So through our location engine API, you will be able to work with the information that button holds. And again, that is done to enable the job of communicating the underlying state of an asset. Second, we're including an LED. So that allows very easy asset-to-human communication, as it were, indicating whether a certain piece of equipment is used or not used. It's easily done through the light of an LED. Lastly, we include an accelerometer that's either used to improve accuracy of location or also report on the underlying state of an asset. So is that moving, is that not moving? The form factor, the criteria otherwise are built to get these jobs done. So we're looking at IP65 for robustness, a replaceable battery, a very common concern on our partner side. Dimensions that make this tag usable, I believe, for the largest variety of assets that are considered to be tracked. So this is 43 by 43 millimeters in the metric system, plus a flat bottom. So that's actually feedback that we've gotten from our customers, that a flat bottom would make our current tough beacon more universally usable, that we have taken that feedback and included it. Plus, we still include the ability to attach the tag beacon with a leash to a device. Before handing over to Orkun, I've not included a picture here. Please get in touch with us or our sales team to get a picture of that device. Shipment-wise or timeline-wise, we're looking at the middle end of October to have those items go out. Orkun, any questions here?
Very interesting. Very interesting product, I must say. But taking a look at your presentation, this slide, I have a question. Is this product going to be a replacement for Tough Beacon? Or because yeah, please go ahead.
sorry for jumping in. I was so much in the talking mode. No, it's not a replacement for the Tough Beacon. The Tough Beacon is one of the most popular beacons. This beacon provides additional functionality, some of which is desirable in this particular beacon. Others would be less ideal in the Tough Beacon. For example, a button always requires a casing that has a flexible element, so that reduces the toughness rating, as it were. So this is not a replacement to the Tough Beacon. It's an alternative side product for use cases like the ones described here.
Okay, thanks for answering my question in details. And the next one will be the replaceable battery. Okay, but what is the expected battery life time of the tag beacon?
Yeah.
Maybe our participants would like to hear about it as well.
Yeah, I'm certain, and my answer will of course be somewhat hesitant. That depends, of course, on the broadcasting power and the transmission interval. I believe our tech specs include specific values for the most popular settings. So again, I can encourage everybody to get in touch. Those tech specs are available, and those answer that question.
Okay, great. That's all from my side.
Good, perfect. Then let's move on. We've already half an hour in this call. Other things we're thinking about, right? So these are other issues that we're seeing. Number one, as we move closer to the healthcare space, health and safety regulation, in particular related towards disinfection and cleanliness, become more important. That's why we offer antibacterial coating with our beacons. Antibacterial coating simply means that bacteria don't survive as long on the surface. Next, we see an increase in demand or applications that require sort of a lone survivor beacon that lasts for a very long time as an outpost, as it were. Here we're looking at that problem and very, very interested in hearing from you if you have that problem as well. Our response is in the form of a power beacon, so that's a beacon with drastically longer battery life. And again, very interested in hearing from you if that lone survivor beacon is something that you need to provide the value to your customers that you are providing. Largely, if we look at very rough environments, so those would be mining, those would be manufacturing, those would be heavy industries, those would be oil drilling. We are seeing an increase here as well, mostly in security applications. That's why we're looking to respond to that demand and get that job done through our heavy-duty beacon. Again, the naming isn't very, very creative, but hopefully informative. So that's a beacon that's supposed to help our customers working in these rough environments get their job done. And lastly, as the tracking of staff and guests and patient and children increases, again, within the framework of beacons being mobile and receivers being stationary, we are heavily considering and planning and prototyping a wearable beacon. Again, don't overrun our sales team with super specific requests on the timeline. We're very interested in your feedback. Your feedback, in fact, drives our product design decisions and our manufacturing decisions. All these products are at a stage that we are considering their launch as they serve what you are doing to help your customers. So please do reach out. That concludes our outlook on the hardware side. Moving on to what we're doing on the software side. And again, I believe that supporting the actual application that powers the value for the ultimate business is one of the key considerations. We're redoing two parts of our software. Number one is that we will be releasing a new version of our infrastructure management services, and those services are designed to get the job done that you can primarily focus on the application value, the value that you provide on top of the beacons to your customers, because that's of course what we look forward to, because we grow jointly as the application of applications to real world problem grows. So what we focus on is 4 elements with our infrastructure management offering. Number one, minimize the device provisioning, organization, and control, and that relates to all the aspects from sharing devices, having them shared both within an organization and outside an organization, manage their control, and be on target with regards to the allocation of devices to particular venues. Secondly, and I believe this is especially in light of what Orkun mentioned earlier, a key element, security becomes ever more important. We take care of security from the perspective of both the back end, which holds, of course, all settings and all configurations of all the beacons that we have been providing to you and all our partners around the world, which is quite large. Secondly, it provides the security of the interaction between the device and the beacon, so to make sure that your infrastructure can never be taken hostage being lost to hackers. And lastly, on the security side, a feature that has been growing in demand also in Q2 after picking up in Q1 is the ability to shuffle UIDs. And here the core element of that product is that once an infrastructure is deployed at large, the IDs of a beacon are obviously publicly available. That's the whole point. However, that makes them vulnerable to attackers recording beacon IDs and using them for your own purposes. We have a proprietary mechanism to shuffle IDs, which ensures that infrastructure is only used by our partners directly. Lastly, of course, both our security feature as well as the planning, provisioning, and deployment of all devices is fully supported with both the API and the SDK. Again, that will be going live on the 14th, so we're heavy at work. On the right, you see one of the dev kits that I recommend you to check out if you're interested in those elements. Secondly, looking again at the software value that we provide in order to facilitate providing business value from our partners to our customers. We're also redoing our RTLS offering, both on the web panel side, so on the easy-to-use web interface, as well as on the API side, structuring that around the problems that we see in the real world. And again, those are the ones I've mentioned before, really identifying values that speak to the ultimate users of an application. That would be the reduction of search time, thereby freeing up capacities on the staff side, monitoring inventory, the state of assets, all those matters. Again, by the 14th, we'll be redoing our applications here. On the right, you will find a dev kit that speaks to that. Continuing, before we jump to the questions, I think my marketing team will be very happy if I point you to this slide, which includes free shipping when you register for one of the 2 new starter kits, which again I recommend as they focus on enabling you to provide value to your customers. Free shipping for the first 30, I believe, that sign up. Do use that link. Before we come to my favorite part, which is sharing resource that I've used, I'll let Orkun lead with questions both from the chat or those that, Orkun, that you think yourself that should be cleared up. Go ahead.
Okay, Stefan, I think you were so clear that there are no questions at this very moment
okay.
from our participants, attendees. So I will be happy if you could type your questions, if there are any, and I will be happy to read your questions out loud so that Stefan could elaborate on them. So let's wait for a while, maybe a minute or two, while they're typing.
Sure.
And
in the meantime, Orkun, looking at our current product pipeline, what have you been seeing what have you seen being the most demanded product? If you look at the Card Beacon, Tough Beacon, Beacon Pro, what's your observation from the region where you're active?
I can say that actually the Tough Beacon is right now very popular because of some outdoor use cases, asset tracking, like on construction sites, tracking of forklifts, tracking of cranes, and for this kind of use cases where our customers would like to attach this beacon to the assets, their assets to track. That's why I think the Tag Beacon fits there well as well, because it also has a configurable button. I think this is one of the things, and for indoor use cases, I think the Beacon Pro is one of the best choices because it comes with 2 power-saving sensors, the built-in real-time clock, and then the ambient light sensor. I think the beacon, the real-time clock is the most handy if we consider use cases like indoor navigation or location-based content in a mall. Right. So our customers won't have to use the beacon on 100% duty cycle because mostly malls are working from 10 a.m. until 10 p.m. 12 hours in fact. So
Right.
this helps our customers to save 50%, double their battery life of their beacons, of their
Right.
beacon infrastructure. So I think that the Beacon Pro is also a product that we see a high demand from our customers, from retail and museum and so on.
Right. I can actually, I mean, this is great anecdotal evidence, and we didn't arrange that before the call. But I've just looked at the data before, and the Tough Beacon actually is one of the fastest growing products that we have seen so far, nearly overtaking the Beacon Pro in the last quarter. So I see that also in the numbers. With the real-time clock, can you explain that again? So as a user, what do I do? I use that clock to do what to save battery?
Let's say that you can either order your Beacon Pro to come with certain rules, or you can go to your Kontakt.io web panel and you can set up certain rules where you will arrange certain times for Beacon to go to sleep mode. This means that as a, let's say, a Beacon infrastructure owner, assuming that you own a, let's say, shopping mall, you could go to Kontakt.io web panel, set up a rule that your Beacon will just, transmit signal within given timeline, and outside of this timeline, Beacon will simply go into the sleeping mode. So you will actually be saving battery life.
Right. Perfect. I've been looking here into some questions. I mean, maybe Alka, do you want to sum them up, or should I go ahead?
I think I have a problem because I don't see any questions
Ah,
on my
okay.
screen. So maybe it's me actually. Maybe there are questions, but it's me not seeing any questions. That's why
Perfect.
it would be good if you could read them out loud and answer.
I will do both. So here
Please
the
help
first.
yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, no problem. So here our first question is on the healthcare industry, where the primary use case is patient and staff track, and this is asked by Deepak Rao, pointing out that both the antibacterial coating and the variable form factor are critical for them. And this is a very good point. We see the healthcare space as one of the fastest growing spaces, hence the antibacterial coating. And we simultaneously also see the tracking of people as one of the fastest growing spaces. And of course, we understand that a tag beacon might be good to attach to a member of staff, but might be less ideal if you want to, for example, track a patient in distress or small children. So thank you, Deepak. That's a very good question. That's what we are working on. I've got another question coming in here regarding the shuffle IDs. And here the question is, the feedback is that the shuffling of the IDs is predictable. And the follow-up question would be whether an offline application would not be able to predict future UUIDs. So this is a good question from Ahmed Salam. Let me step back here a bit to point out to those that might not be familiar with what shuffling ID means. Assume you have two fast food restaurants, and fast food restaurant number one installs beacons at the entrance and uses that beacon to outline a promotion within that fast food restaurant, whatever, 10% off Coca-Cola that day. The problem is that that infrastructure could be utilized by fast food chain number two, which could capture the value of the beacons at the entrance of fast food restaurant number one, the UUID as it were, and trigger their own messages for customers entering fast food restaurant number one to guide them towards fast food restaurant number two. That is prevented by having shuffling IDs, so the ID sent out by the beacon in front of fast food restaurant number one is never the same, but it changes in a pattern. With the receiving device, a mobile phone, receiving a cleared ID from our backend. A problem can arise if the shuffling of that ID is predictable. That's the question Ahmed is pointing out here. However, I can comment that we have never seen, and the shuffling mechanism is obviously complex enough, or not obviously, but is complex enough to make sure that we don't see that problem in the real world. Now let me find out more questions here. So I've seen a number of questions on Wi-Fi access points. Orkun, I'll give it back to you in a second. Let me just quickly comment here on the Wi-Fi access points. Tim Lichty, in fact, is asking how we see the work of beacons together with Wi-Fi access points with regards to indoor tracking in this point. Yeah, there's a variety of players, and if you just, for example, Google for the Meraki location API, company with whom we are collaborating as well, you'll notice that access points that are Bluetooth enabled collaborate with leaders in the beacon tag space like ourselves to provide combined solutions. So that is a very interesting market, and if you are interested or have projects in a field where Wi-Fi points already are prevalent, do clarify which model you have or which company is providing that access, and get in touch. We're always interested to work on that. Orkun, back to you.
Thank you, Stefan. Ahmed Salam. Ahmed sent me an email because he said that I didn't see his questions. Could you please tell me if you answered his questions? Is it planned to have a mesh plus GPIO beacon? There are some applications that requires more sensors than the standard sensors with the beacon.
Right. Yeah. So that's also a very common question in regards to providing access to GPIO, right? So GPIO, of course, is an interface on the hardware level where there would be the ability to attach additional sensors to the beacon and then relay those on mesh via mesh to whatever is the communication technology that ultimately gives that data to the internet. And the answer here is that is a very particular problem you're solving. It's probably a very interesting one, but most likely I'd start here on more of a prototyping platform before switching to us, as we are very much focused on larger scale. So to identify the use case, validate the business case, I think prototyping platforms are a better fit. But of course, we are interested at scale and once we have close specifications. I see another question here on the industries for whom the tag beacon will be the most beneficial. I think it's one way to think about industries as the main driver of the application of the tag beacon, but probably it's use cases. For example, if you look at a use case where you're interested in finding out where a certain piece of equipment is or which steps have been passed through by a certain number of staff, and then those problems are not so much sector specific as they are specific to the nature of the process you're analyzing. That's a very abstract answer, I apologize. But I believe if I had to pick now two sectors, it's most likely going to be manufacturing. That's the later stages of manufacturing, so assembly, packaging, distribution, and healthcare, again, both on the patient and the asset level. I've got another question here, whether the RTLS system that we're providing is true X, Y, Z, or is it still just proximity? That's a very good question. So we still constrain ourselves from providing a longitude, latitude. However, we are moving towards a zoning system that provides the location in the form of functional accuracy, so within a zone, rather than X, Y, Z coordinates. Again, the key issue with X, Y, Z in the case of Bluetooth is, of course, the underlying stability of the signal itself, and being accurate enough at a cost point that makes sense. And let me switch to this slide. We've looked at location engine systems and the cost point that does make sense in these articles. Do have a look there. So going further down, do we have use cases for turn-by-turn directions in facilities like warehouses or workers? I'm personally not aware of those, but I'm quite sure that within the industrial side of our partners, we do find those applications. But typically, the guidance systems in warehouses are such that simply knowing your way is more effective than a mobile phone guidance system, I believe. Now, going through these slides here, and I find quite a variety of questions. One of those would be how do we monitor the battery level for each beacon? Here, two comments. We monitor the battery level of each beacons in one of three ways. Number one is through the SDK that can be used within your app. That's part of infrastructure management. Again, that will be released on the 14th. What that does is that your app captures the battery level of a particular beacon and relays that to the cloud, where it's then accessible within the web panel or through the APIs provided. Method number two is our management app, again, also part of infrastructure management. And number three is using our gateway, so that allows you to remotely monitor your beacon infrastructure, including capturing the battery level. And in all those three cases, the local battery level is captured, relayed to the cloud from where it can be accessed. We have a question on the starter kit availability and prices. I believe that will be answered after this call. And again, how can the link be pressed? I think I'm currently sharing my screen, so I believe you'll get the slides following this call, which will include the links to the dev kit. There's a couple of technical questions. Again, I can encourage you to ask those questions directly to our team. We'll be happy to go back on a closer discussion. So here do we find another interesting question. What is the value of infrastructure management as such? Yeah, that's a threefold value. Really, we see three main jobs that you need to get done once infrastructure grows. Number one is security, and that relates to both the backend and the device level security. That is an issue that is typically overlooked in an earlier stage of the process of building a product, but throughout the life cycle of a solution, that becomes more and more important. As Orkun mentioned earlier, the size of projects grows, and that is the time when, in fact, a security solution is required. Number two is handling the maintenance care of your beacons. And here what we see is that two things are critically important. Number one, remotely monitoring the beacons. That is done through the access to the API or the SDK used within the infrastructure management system. And number three is provide custom solution in high density areas. And that is typically handled, in our case, through the gateway that has the ability to manage beacons remotely and make sure that both firmware settings and battery levels are up to date. Of course, all that is combined with predictive maintenance system that alert you before an issue can arise. Good. I believe the variety of questions that I'm seeing here now is so high that we'll take them following up this webinar. I believe they are captured. So Orkun, unless you have any other final points or things you would like to point out, I'd move to close, and then we'll be more than happy to answer all your questions on email, throughout resources.
Thank you, Stefan. I would like to thank all of our customers, attendees, for their time, and also for your time and the presentation. If you have an account executive at Kontakt.io, please drop your questions to our sales team, to your account executive. If you do not have one, you can drop your emails at hello@kontakt.io, and we will make sure that your questions are being answered, and we will be at your service. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good day, everybody, and an enjoyable weekend. Goodbye.